I gave my son everything. That is not an exaggeration spoken in the heat of anger, nor is it the lament of a martyr. It is a simple statement of fact as plain and solid as the oak table my late husband Robert built with his own hands. For 35 years, that table was the center of our family. For the last 5, after Robert was gone, it became the altar upon which I sacrificed the rest of my life for my son, David. The irony is that the first clue to the great betrayal was found in a file drawer in the small office just off the kitchen, not 10 feet from that very table. My days had fallen into a quiet, predictable rhythm after Robert's passing. The house, once loud with the joyful chaos of a growing boy and the steady presence of a loving husband, had become vast and silent. The silence was a physical thing, a weight that settled in the rooms and pressed down on my shoulders. I kept busy. I tended to my garden, I volunteered at the local library, and I made sure David, his wife Sarah, and my granddaughter Lily never wanted for anything. My life became an extension of theirs, a support system they took for granted, and one I gave without question. It was, I believed, what a mother did. Robert had been a careful man. He had worked hard, saved diligently, and left me financially secure. We had the house paid in full and a portfolio of investments meant to see me through my remaining years in comfort. But David's life always seemed to be teetering on the edge of some new, expensive precipice. When he and Sarah wanted to buy their first home, a charming but pricey colonial in a good school district, they were short on the down payment. I didn't hesitate. I sold a portion of the stocks Robert had nurtured so carefully and gave them the money. I called it a gift. They called it a lifesaver. I didn't ask for a note or a promise, only for them to be happy. A few years later, David's business, a boutique marketing firm, was struggling. He spoke of cash flow problems, of needing a capital injection to land a big client that would secure their future. He came to me, his face etched with worry, looking so much like the little boy who used to come to me with a scraped knee. He swore it was a loan, that he would pay me back with interest as soon as the contract was signed. I went to the bank. I took out a home equity line of credit on the house Robert and I had built our lives in. My financial advisor, a cautious man named Mr. Peters, had advised against it. He had warned me that I was eroding my own foundation. I remember telling him, with a confidence that now feels like the height of foolishness, that my son was my foundation. The business venture succeeded, or so he told me. The loan was never repaid. When I gently brought it up a year later, David had looked pained. He explained that all the profits had to be reinvested for growth. Sarah had stood beside him, her hand on his arm, and said, "We think of it as your investment in our family, Eleanor, in Lily's future." How could I argue with that? I let it go. The payments for the credit line became a permanent fixture in my monthly budget, a quiet drain on my resources. Then came the private school tuition for Lily, the orthodontist bills, the expensive summer camps. Each time they would come to me with apologies and explanations. The property taxes had gone up. Sarah's car needed a major repair. It was always something. And each time I would write a check. I started living more frugally myself. I stopped buying new clothes. I stretched meals. I turned the thermostat down in the winter until I could see my breath in the mornings. I told myself it was for them. It was for Lily. I loved my granddaughter with a fierceness that was absolute, and I would have done anything to ensure her happiness. It was this love they used as their primary tool of extraction. My own friends, like my neighbor Margaret, saw it. She would watch them pull away in their new SUV, the one I had helped them afford, and she would look at me over the fence, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're too good to them, Eleanor," she said more than once. I would just smile and say, "He's my son." I believed that explained and excused everything. I was the matriarch, the provider, the quiet engine that powered their comfortable lives. I did not realize I was also the resource being systematically depleted. The inciting incident, the moment the first crack appeared in the facade of my life, was mundane. It was a Tuesday in April, a cool, rainy day. David had called me in a minor panic. He and Sarah were applying to refinance their mortgage, and the bank needed a mountain of paperwork by the end of the day. He was stuck in meetings, and Sarah was overwhelmed with Lily. He asked if I could possibly come over and help her find everything. Of course, I said yes. I drove the 20 minutes to their house, the house I had helped them buy, and let myself in with the key they had given me. Sarah was flustered. Papers spread all over their dining room table. She gave me a quick, distracted hug and a list of documents. "The old tax returns should be in the filing cabinet in the office, Mom," she said, using the title that had once warmed my heart but was now beginning to feel like a job description. "And David's original business incorporation papers." I went into their small, neat home office and began to work my way through the filing cabinet. I was efficient. I had managed our own family's finances for 40 years. This was second nature. I found the tax returns easily. I found the business papers. But as I was closing the drawer, my fingers brushed against a thick, high-quality vellum envelope tucked away at the very back, behind the files for warranties and manuals. It was out of place. It was from a law firm, one I didn't recognize. Curiosity is not usually a failing of mine, but the oddness of it, the deliberate way it seemed to be hidden, made me pause. I told myself it was none of my business. I started to push the drawer shut, but my hand wouldn't obey. A cold feeling, a prickle of profound unease washed over me. I pulled the envelope out. It was not sealed. Inside was a bound document printed on the same heavy paper. The cover page read, "Last Will and Testament of David Robert Miller," my son's full name. I felt a small, strange flutter in my chest. It was sensible, of course, for a man with a wife and child to have a will. Robert and I had made ours years ago. I thought perhaps he wanted to show it to me, to ask my advice, and had forgotten. I almost called out to Sarah to ask about it, but something held me back. A quiet, internal voice whispered, "Just look." I opened it. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, the formal declarations. It was a simple will. He named Sarah as his executrix. He left everything, the house, his share of the business, his savings, his investments, to her. If she were to predecease him, everything was to be held in trust for his beloved daughter, Lillian Grace Miller. That was Lily. My heart swelled with love for her name, so formally written. It was as it should be. And then I saw the other clause. It was under a section titled Contingencies. It stated that in the event that both his wife, Sarah Miller, and his daughter, Lillian Grace Miller, were to predecease him, his entire estate was to be divided equally between two specific charities, a National Animal Welfare Society and a Children's Health Fund. I read it again, and a third time. My name was not there. I was not a beneficiary, not even as a final contingency. If my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter were all gone, the wealth that I had almost single-handedly created for them, the assets built from the bones of my own financial security, would go to strangers. It was as if I did not exist, or worse, it was as if my existence had been considered and then deliberately, consciously erased. A coldness spread from my chest through my entire body. My hands went numb. I could hear my own heart pounding in the sudden, roaring silence of the small room. I looked at the date on the document. It had been drafted and signed 6 months prior. 6 months. I tried to remember what was happening then. It was just after I had given them the last large sum, the $20,000 they needed to finally get ahead of the curve, as David had put it. The money was for a new deck and landscaping so they could increase the home's value. I had sold the last of Robert's favorite blue-chip stocks for that. I remembered the ache I felt as I authorized the sale, like I was selling a piece of him. I had consoled myself with the thought that it was for family. And 6 months ago, after taking that final piece of my husband's legacy, my son had gone to a lawyer and formally written me out of his life and his death. I did not gasp. I did not cry. Some deeper, more primal instinct took over. the instinct of self-preservation. My hands, though numb, were steady. I carefully slid the will back into its vellum envelope. I tucked it exactly where I had found it, at the very back of the drawer, behind the file of appliance warranties. I closed the drawer. The click of the metal latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, in, out. I placed the tax returns and the business papers in a neat pile on the desk. I walked out of the office. Sarah was on the phone, her back to me. "No, the bank has been a nightmare," she was saying, her voice laced with manufactured stress. "But my mother-in-law is here. She's a saint. She's helping us sort it all out." A saint. The word landed in my mind like a stone. A saint is a holy figure, revered after death. They were already treating me as if I were a memorial, a benevolent ghost who provided for them from beyond the veil of my own life. I didn't say a word. I walked to the front door, picked up my purse and my coat, and left. I didn't say goodbye. As I drove home, the rain was coming down harder, blurring the world outside. But inside my mind, for the first time in years, something was becoming terrifyingly clear. The investigation had begun. It was not an investigation of my son, but an audit of my own life, my own choices, my own profound and devastating blindness. Back in my own quiet house, I did not turn on the television or the radio. I sat at the oak table Robert had built, and I let the silence I had once feared become my accomplice. The will was the inciting wound, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was not the whole story. It was merely a symptom of a much deeper disease. My mind, which had for so long been occupied with their needs, their schedules, their worries, was now free to turn inward, to examine the past not as a series of loving sacrifices, but as a long, slow, methodical heist. I started with my own bank statements. I had kept meticulous records, a habit from my years of managing a household on a single income. I went to the old metal filing cabinet in my study, the twin to the one in their home, and I began to pull files. For 5 years, I had been documenting my own financial ruin. I spread the statements out on the table, year by year. The transfers to David's account, the checks written to Sarah, the credit card payments for bills that were not mine. It was all there, in black and white. The numbers formed a horrifying narrative. I had given them over $200,000. A significant portion of that was from the equity line on my own home, a debt I was still paying off month by month. The rest was from the slow, steady liquidation of the portfolio Robert had built to protect me. He had wanted me to travel, to be secure, to live without worry. Instead, I had systematically dismantled his final gift of love and handed it over to our son. As I looked at the cold, hard figures, memories began to surface, now cast in a new, sinister light. I remember David explaining why they needed a new, top-of-the-line SUV. "It's for safety, Mom," he had said, his voice earnest, "for when we're driving Lily." How could I argue with that? I remembered Sarah talking about the expensive private school. "The public schools just aren't good enough for her," she had sighed. "We want her to have every advantage." The subtext was clear. If I truly loved my granddaughter, I would help. My love had been leveraged again and again. I stayed up all night piecing it together. It wasn't just the large sums, it was the constant smaller drains. "Mom, can you pick up the groceries for us this week? We're just so swamped." "Eleanor, Lily needs a new laptop for school. Could you possibly—" It never stopped. I had become their personal, no-limit credit card, the one that never required repayment, the one that came with a smile and a home-cooked meal. The next morning, I knew I had to confront him. Not with anger, but with a question. I needed to see his face, to hear his voice, when I pierced the bubble of our shared delusion. I called him. I kept my voice even, calm. I said I had been reviewing my finances and was feeling a bit concerned about my long-term security. I asked if we could talk. He sighed, a sound of profound impatience. "Mom, I'm really busy today. Can this wait?" I said, "No, David, it can't." He came over that evening. He walked in, dropping his keys on the counter with a clatter, the very picture of a busy, put-upon man. Sarah was not with him. He had come alone. "Okay, Mom, what's this about?" he asked, already looking at his watch. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of my kitchen, a stranger in the room where I had taught him to tie his shoes. I took a deep breath. "David," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I've been looking over my accounts. Over the past 5 years, I have given you and Sarah a great deal of money. I also have a significant loan against this house, which I took out for your business." He crossed his arms. His expression shifted from impatience to defensiveness. "We've been over this, Mom. It was for the family. It was an investment." "An investment usually implies some sort of return," I said quietly. "Or at least, the preservation of the principal. My savings are nearly gone, David. My income is fixed. I am paying interest on a loan that has not been repaid. I am worried." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold. There was no trace of the little boy with the scraped knee. "What are you saying? That you want us to pay it all back now? We can't. You know that. You're making me feel terrible." It was textbook. He was turning it back on me, making my valid financial concerns into an emotional attack on him. He was gaslighting me. The term was new to me, something I'd heard younger people say, but the experience was as old as time. He was making me the villain for questioning the narrative he had created. "I'm just trying to understand the plan, David," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "If something were to happen to me, my estate is significantly diminished. If something were to happen to you, what is the plan for everything?" This was my test. I was leading him toward the subject of the will without revealing I had seen it. His reaction would tell me everything. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Mom, you're being morbid and a little paranoid. Everything is fine. Sarah and I have everything worked out. You don't need to worry about it." He waved a dismissive hand. "You're getting older. You're starting to get confused about these things. Maybe you should let me and Sarah handle your finances for you. It's clearly becoming too much for you." There it was. The suggestion that I was senile, confused, incapable. It was the cruelest, most efficient way to shut me down, to invalidate my reality. He wasn't just denying the problem, he was trying to convince me that I was the problem. He saw my concern not as a legitimate issue, but as a symptom of my own decline. I looked at the man standing in my kitchen, the son I had given everything to, and I felt a profound and terrifying disconnect. I didn't know him at all. "I see," I said. My voice was a whisper. "I'm just tired, I suppose." He seized on it, his relief palpable. "Exactly. You're tired. You've been worrying for no reason. We're fine, you're fine, everything is fine. Now, I have to go. Sarah's waiting." He came over and gave me a perfunctory, one-armed hug. It felt like being touched by a block of ice. "Get some rest, Mom, and stop worrying." Then he was gone, the front door closing softly behind him. I stood there for a long time, the coldness in my chest turning into a slow-burning fire. He had not only confirmed my fears, he had shown me the depth of his contempt. I was not a mother to be respected, but a problem to be managed. The gaslighting was a crucial mistake on his part. It was intended to make me doubt myself, to make me retreat into confusion and fear. Instead, it did the opposite. It clarified everything. If he was willing to lie so boldly, to paint me as senile for asking simple questions, then the deception was far deeper than I had imagined. My quiet internal audit was no longer enough. I needed proof. I needed primary evidence that could not be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old woman. I thought back to the last big check I had written, the $20,000 for the deck and landscaping. I remembered the conversation vividly. David and Sarah had sat on my sofa, showing me glossy brochures of beautiful redwood decks and professionally landscaped gardens. "It's an investment in the property, Eleanor," Sarah had said. "The real estate agent said it could add $40,000 to the home's value." It had made sense at the time. A practical, sensible investment. I drove by their house the next day. There was no new deck. The backyard was the same as it had always been. A simple lawn with a swing set for Lily. There was no sign of recent construction, no newly planted trees or flower beds, just grass. I parked down the street and just looked at the house I had paid the down payment on, the house whose value they were supposedly so keen to increase. The lie was so blatant, so lazy. It was as if they didn't even care if I found out. They were that confident in their control over me. But where had the money gone? $20,000 doesn't just vanish. My first thought was debt. Perhaps the business was in worse shape than he let on. But that didn't feel right. Their lifestyle wasn't one of people struggling with debt. The new SUV, Sarah's designer handbags, the expensive restaurants they posted about on social media. I had never paid much attention to social media, but Lily had set up an account for me years ago so I could see her pictures. On a hunch, I opened the app for the first time in months. Their profiles were public. I scrolled through Sarah's feed. Pictures of Lily, of course. Pictures of her and David at parties, smiling. And then I found it. A series of photos dated 5 months earlier, just a few weeks after I had given them the money. They were in Italy, a 2-week trip. Pictures of them smiling in front of the Colosseum in Rome, riding a gondola in Venice, posing with glasses of wine on a sun-drenched terrace in Tuscany. The captions were full of hashtags. Hashtag living our best life. Hashtag Italian dream. Hashtag worth it. I zoomed in on one of the photos. Sarah was wearing a new, expensive-looking watch. David was raising a glass to the camera, a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure on his face. The deck and landscaping money, their investment in the property. It had been a lie, a complete and utter fabrication to fund a luxury European vacation. They had taken the last remnants of my husband's legacy and drunk it away on a terrace in Tuscany. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to sit down. It wasn't just the lie. It was the casual cruelty of it, the sheer breathtaking entitlement. They hadn't even bothered to be clever. They had flaunted their deception in public, so sure was in my dotage, too disconnected and slow to ever notice. I was not a person to them. I was a bank, an ATM that dispensed love and money in equal, unending measure, and I had finally run out of both. That night, I did not sleep at all. I sat in the dark, the glow of my phone illuminating the damning photos. I had the proof. The will had shown me their intention. The conversation had shown me their contempt. The photographs showed me their character. The picture was complete now, a triptych of betrayal, painted in excruciating detail. I knew what I had to do. The time for questions was over. The time for polite conversation was over. The time for grief was coming to an end. The next time I saw them was at Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual I had insisted on for years, believing it kept us close. This time, it felt like a scene from a play where only I knew the final act. I watched them. I watched the way David avoided my eyes. I watched the way Sarah gave me a bright, false smile and asked if I was feeling better. I watched them praise my cooking, the very food I had bought with my dwindling funds. I played my part. I smiled. I asked about their week. I listened to them talk about needing to get the car serviced and how expensive it was. I felt nothing. The space inside me where my love for them used to live was now a cold, empty cavern. After dinner, while Sarah was clearing the plates and David was on his phone, I asked Lily to show me the pictures from her school's art fair. She was a wonderfully talented girl with a kind and gentle heart. She was the one true, untainted thing in this whole mess. As she proudly showed me her drawings on her tablet, I asked her, as casually as I could, "Did you have fun in Italy with Mommy and Daddy? I saw the pictures. It looked beautiful." Lily's face lit up. "Oh, it was the best, Grandma. We saw everything, and Daddy said it was a special secret trip, just for us." A special secret trip. My breath caught in my throat. "A secret?" I asked. "Why was it a secret?" She shrugged, the way children do. "I don't know. Daddy just said we shouldn't talk about it too much. He said it was our special family adventure." Then David was there, his voice sharp. "Lily, that's enough screen time. Go get ready for bed." He shot me a look of pure fury, his eyes narrowed. He had heard. He knew I had found out. Lily, oblivious, gave me a hug and a kiss and ran upstairs. David turned to me. "What do you think you're doing, interrogating my daughter?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I asked her about her vacation," I said, my own voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The one you took with the money I gave you for a deck." Sarah had come back into the room, her face pale. She knew what was happening. "Eleanor, you don't understand," she started. "Oh, I think I do," I said, standing up from the table. "I understand perfectly." David stepped toward me, his face contorted with a strange mix of anger and panic. "Now listen to me. You are confused. We used that money to pay off some high-interest business debts. It was the smartest financial move. The trip was paid for with credit card points. You don't know what you're talking about." It was another lie, more elaborate this time, but just as hollow. Credit card points don't pay for 2 weeks in Italy with new watches and fine dining. This was the moment, the final confrontation before the end of the old world. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, and I felt a profound sense of pity for him. He was so trapped in his own web of deceit that he could no longer even see the truth. He would lie and lie and lie, because the alternative, admitting what he had done, what he had become, was simply too monstrous for him to face. "You know, David," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of my newfound certainty, "I saw your will." The color drained from his face. Sarah let out a small, sharp gasp. The lie about the credit card points died on his lips. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. This was the one thing he couldn't explain away. This was the one truth he couldn't twist. "How?" he stammered. "How did you went through our private things." The accusation was pathetic, the last gasp of a guilty man. "It was in an unsealed envelope in a filing cabinet you asked me to organize for you," I stated calmly. "An oversight, I'm sure." Sarah found her voice first. It was brittle, sharp. "We did that on the advice of our lawyer. It's for tax purposes. It's to protect the assets for Lily. It's standard practice, Eleanor. You're taking this so personally." To protect the assets. From me. She said it out loud. She admitted that they viewed me, their benefactor, their mother, as a potential liability to be neutralized, a threat to the very wealth I had provided. That was it. That was the confession. It wasn't a tearful admission of guilt. It was a cold, pragmatic justification. They had calculated, with the help of a lawyer, the best way to ensure that once I had been fully drained, I could lay no further claim to what they now considered theirs. My use to them was finite, and they had planned for my obsolescence. I began to feel a strange, terrifying calm settle over me. It was the lowest point, the absolute nadir of my life. I was standing in my own home, being told by my son and his wife that my life's sacrifice was nothing more than a transaction, and that they had already made arrangements for a future that did not include me in any meaningful way. The love I had poured out for decades had been received as currency, and it had all been spent. I felt like I was drowning. The silence in the room was water filling my lungs. The faces of my son and daughter-in-law blurred, their features distorted as if seen from underwater. All the years, all the moments of love and sacrifice flashed before my eyes, but now they were tainted, recontextualized as acts of foolishness. the handmade birthday cards, the sleepless nights with a sick child, the pride at his graduation, the joy at his wedding. It was all a long prelude to this single, brutal moment of clarification. My entire identity as a mother, the central pillar of my existence, crumbled into dust. And then something shifted. The drowning sensation stopped. The water receded. I could breathe again. The grief, so immense and overwhelming, burned itself out in an instant, leaving behind not ash but something hard and cold and clear. It was like a fever breaking. I looked at David and Sarah, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance, and I no longer saw my family. I saw two strangers who had taken up residence in my life, strangers I no longer owed anything. The tears that I thought would surely come never did. A single clear thought formed in my mind. I am done. I was done crying. I was done sacrificing. I was done being the quiet, accommodating, endlessly forgiving mother. That woman had died in this room, tonight. A new woman was taking her place, a woman forged in the cold fire of betrayal, a woman who understood that love without respect is just exploitation. I looked at them, truly looked at them, without the filter of maternal love. I saw their weakness, their greed, their pathetic self-justification, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. I think, I said, my voice so cold it seemed to crack the air, that you should both leave now. David started to speak, to argue, to plead, but I held up a hand. There's nothing left to say. Not tonight. Not ever, perhaps. Just go. They stared at me, shocked into silence by this new, unrecognizable version of their mother. They had expected tears, recriminations, a dramatic scene they could manage and dismiss. They were not prepared for the quiet, absolute finality in my voice. They turned, and without another word, they left my house. I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, not in sorrow, but with the first fragile feeling of resolve I had felt in years. The reckoning had begun. The next morning, I did not call my friend Margaret to cry on her shoulder. I did not sit and stare at old photographs. I went to my desk, my mind clear and sharp. I made a list. It was a short list. First, evidence. Second, a lawyer. I spent the morning printing out the social media posts from their Italian vacation. I made copies of my bank statements with the relevant transfers highlighted. I wrote down a detailed timeline of every major financial request, every promise of repayment, every excuse. I gathered the documents for the home equity line of credit. I worked with the methodical precision of an accountant preparing for an audit. There was no emotion in it, only a cold, clear focus on the task at hand. For the second item on my list, I did not want a local, friendly family lawyer. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood the brutal mechanics of finance and betrayal. Margaret had, years ago, gone through a bitter divorce. She had spoken in hushed, reverent tones of the lawyer who had handled it, a man named Arthur Thompson. She had called him a shark in a Savile Row suit. He sounded perfect. Section email. I found his firm online. It was a prestigious downtown firm with a sleek, intimidating website. I wrote an email. I kept it brief and factual. I stated my age, my situation, and the nature of the financial entanglement with my son. I mentioned the discovery of the will and the evidence of misappropriated funds. I asked for a consultation. I did not beg or embellish. I simply stated the facts as I knew them. I sent the email and felt a click inside my mind, the sound of a complex machine being set into motion. Mr. Thompson's office replied within an hour. His assistant scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I organized all my documents into a neat binder with labeled tabs. The timeline, the bank statements, the loan agreements, the vacation photos. When I was finished, I looked at the binder sitting on my dining room table. It was the story of the last 5 years of my life. It was heavy with the weight of my own foolishness, but it was also my weapon. Mr. Thompson was exactly as Margaret had described him. He was in his late 60s, with sharp blue eyes, a perfectly tailored gray suit, and an air of immense, unhurried competence. His office was on the top floor of a skyscraper, with a view that stretched for miles. It felt like being on top of the world, looking down at all the messy details of life. He did not offer condolences or platitudes. He shook my hand, offered me a seat, and said, "Tell me everything, Mrs. Miller. Start from the beginning." And so I did. I walked him through the timeline, presenting the documents from my binder as I went. I told him about Robert, about the secure life he had left me. I told him about David's requests, about the HELOC, about the liquidation of my portfolio. I told him about finding the will. I told him about the vacation to Italy. I told my story without tears, my voice even and steady. I was not a grieving mother seeking sympathy. I was a client presenting a case. He listened without interruption. His eyes never left my face, but I could tell he was absorbing every detail, every number. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. He was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the city below. I waited. Finally, he turned back to me. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice calm and measured, "first let me say that you have been the victim of a profound and sustained campaign of financial and emotional abuse." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Financial and emotional abuse. I had thought of it as betrayal, as ingratitude, as greed, but his words gave it a name, a legal and psychological weight that was both devastating and profoundly validating. I hadn't been foolish. I had been abused. I hadn't been weak. I had been manipulated. For the first time, a single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I wiped it away impatiently. "They used your love for your son and granddaughter as a weapon against you," he continued, his voice devoid of pity but full of professional gravity. "They systematically drained your assets for their own enrichment while isolating you and preparing to discard you entirely. The will is the clearest evidence of their long-term intent. It is, forgive my language, monstrous." He paused, then leaned forward. "Now, the question is, what do you want to do about it?" I met his gaze. "I want it to be over," I said. "I want my security back. I want to be free of them." "And the money?" he asked. "The house? The loan?" "I want what is legally and rightfully mine," I said, my voice hardening. "I am not interested in revenge, Mr. Thompson. I am interested in consequences. They made choices. I want them to experience the consequences of those choices." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, showed in his sharp eyes. "Very good," he said. "That is a clear and actionable objective. Let's examine our options." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out a strategy. My legal position was, as he put it, remarkably strong. The home equity line of credit was in my name, secured by my house. The debt was mine, but I had the records of the transfers to David's business account. Mr. Thompson explained we could frame this as a business loan that was now in default. The other funds, the gifts, were more complicated, but the sheer scale and pattern of them, coupled with the evidence of deception like the Italy trip, painted a clear picture of undue influence. But our strongest point of leverage was the house. My house. The one Robert and I had built, fully paid for and in my name alone. I had lived in it for 40 years. It was my fortress, and it was the key. Mr. Thompson laid out a plan. It was cold, methodical, and ruthless. It involved no emotional appeals, no further confrontations, only the quiet, implacable execution of legal and financial maneuvers. It was perfect. The first step was to sever all financial ties. On Mr. Thompson's advice, I went to my bank the next day. I closed the joint savings account I had inexplicably kept with David for emergencies. I changed all my passwords. I opened new accounts at a different bank, one where they wouldn't know my name or my face. It felt like changing the locks on my life. The second step was to deal with the home equity loan. Mr. Thompson's firm drafted a formal letter to David, demanding immediate repayment of the funds transferred to his business, citing breach of their verbal contract. The letter was a masterpiece of legal threat, referencing fraud, elder abuse, and the potential for civil and even criminal proceedings. It gave him 30 days to respond. The third and most significant step was changing my own will. I had a simple will, drafted years ago, that left everything to David, assuming he would care for Lily. I now saw the naivety of that. I sat with Mr. Thompson and drafted a new one. It was complex and ironclad. I established a trust, a tightly controlled educational trust, for my granddaughter, Lily. It would be managed by a neutral third-party trustee, a bank, with strict instructions that the funds could only be used for her tuition and educational expenses, with no access whatsoever granted to her parents. And the rest? The house, my remaining savings, my personal effects, the beautiful oak table? I left it all to my oldest and dearest friend, Margaret. I knew she didn't need the money, but I also knew she would understand the gesture. She would be the steward of my memory, and I knew she would ensure that Lily always had a place to go, a connection to the grandmother who had loved her. As for David and Sarah, I disinherited them completely. The will included a specific clause drafted by Mr. Thompson, stating that my son, David Robert Miller, and his wife, Sarah Miller, were to receive nothing from my estate, for reasons known to them. Signing that new will was one of the most liberating moments of my life. It was a declaration of independence. I was no longer a resource to be plundered. I was a woman with her own life, her own legacy, and her own choices. The weight that had been on my shoulders for years began to lift. The letter from Mr. Thompson's firm landed like a bomb in David and Sarah's curated life. David called me, his voice a strangled mix of fury and disbelief. "What is this, Mom? What are you doing? Are you trying to ruin me?" I didn't answer. I just said, "David, any and all future communication must go through my lawyer, Mr. Thompson. His number is on the letterhead." And I hung up. I did it again and again. To his calls, to Sarah's tearful, pleading voicemails, to the texts that swung wildly from angry to apologetic. I refused to engage. My silence was my shield and my sword. They were unprepared for my silence. They had always been able to manage my emotions, to twist my love and my guilt to their own ends. But they had no defense against my complete and total withdrawal. They had no leverage. They tried to send messages through other family members, cousins, and aunts who called me to say I was being cruel, that I was tearing the family apart. I gave them the same calm, cool response. "Thank you for your concern. This is a private legal matter." The 30 days passed. They did not repay the loan. They couldn't. They didn't have the money. They had spent it on their lifestyle, on their image, on their Italian dream. They had believed the Bank of Mom would never call in its debts. Mr. Thompson had predicted this. It was time for the final move. I invited them to my house. I did it through Mr. Thompson's office, a formal request for a final meeting. I knew they would come. They were desperate. They probably thought this was their chance to appeal to my better nature, to make me see reason, to cry and beg and activate the mother they thought still lived inside me. They arrived looking haggard. The past month had taken its toll. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed. David looked thinner, his face drawn and tight with stress. They came into the living room, the room where we had celebrated so many birthdays and Christmases, and they stood there uncertainly, like strangers. I was seated in my armchair. Mr. Thompson was with me, a silent, imposing presence in his dark suit. "Mom," David began, his voice cracking, "please, let's just talk about this. We can work something out. A payment plan. Anything. Don't do this to us, to your family." Sarah started to cry softly. "We're sorry, Eleanor. We are so, so sorry. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake." I looked at them. Their sorrow was real, I suppose. But it was not sorrow for what they had done to me. It was sorrow for themselves, for the consequences that were now crashing down upon them. They were not sorry for the betrayal, only for getting caught. I let the silence stretch out, letting their desperation hang in the air. Then I spoke, my voice clear and calm. "This meeting isn't for a negotiation," I said. "It is for a notification." I gestured to Mr. Thompson. He opened his briefcase and produced a document. "As you have defaulted on the loan," he said, his voice a neutral baritone, "and have demonstrated a clear pattern of financial malfeasance, Mrs. Miller has decided on a course of action to protect her assets and recover her losses. She will not be pursuing a lawsuit at this time. The emotional and financial cost of a prolonged legal battle would be too great." A wave of relief washed over David's face. He thought he was getting away with it. He thought I had lost my nerve. He was wrong. "Instead," Mr. Thompson continued, "Mrs. Miller has decided to sell this house." The relief on David's face vanished, replaced by stunned incomprehension. Sell the house?" he stammered. "But this is our family home. This is where you live." "Precisely," I said. "It is my home. It is my single largest asset, and I can no longer afford to maintain it, thanks to the debts I incurred on your behalf. The market is strong. My realtor believes it will sell quickly. The proceeds will pay off the equity line you defaulted on, and the remainder will provide me with the financial security I require for my retirement." Sarah sank onto the sofa, her face ashen. "Where will you go?" she whispered. "I have already put a deposit on a small apartment in a lovely retirement community across town," I said. "It has a garden. I will be very comfortable." David stared at me, his mind finally grasping the full, brutal reality of the situation. This wasn't a punishment. It was a logical, financial decision, a consequence. He had drained my liquid assets, so I was liquidating my fixed assets. It was that simple. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "This house is my inheritance. It's Lily's inheritance." And there it was. The truth finally laid bare. He did not see the house as my home. He saw it as his future property, something he was waiting to collect. He was already living in his inheritance, and I was just the caretaker. "The house was never your inheritance, David," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "It was my home. An inheritance is a gift, not an entitlement. You don't seem to understand the difference." "As for Lily," I continued, "I have made separate, ironclad provisions for her future and her education. She will be well taken care of. She is the only thing in this sorry mess that I still have an obligation to protect." He looked from me to Mr. Thompson and back again, searching for a weak point, an opening. There was none. He saw only two implacable forces, a determined mother and her very expensive lawyer. "So that's it?" he finally choked out. "You're just cutting us off, throwing us away?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had tended for 40 years. "You have that backward, David," I said softly, not looking at him. "You threw me away a long time ago. You and your wife made a calculated decision that I was disposable. You wrote me out of your future. All I am doing now is honoring your choice. I am simply writing myself back into my own." I turned back to them. My face was calm. The war inside me was over. I was at peace. "The house will be listed for sale on Monday. The realtor will need to take photos. You will be contacted to arrange a time. Now, I would like you to leave my home for the last time." They didn't move for a moment, frozen in disbelief. Then Sarah began to sob, ugly, gasping sounds. David just stared at me, his eyes filled with a hatred that was startling in its purity. He had never looked at me with love, I realized, only with need. Now that the need could no longer be met, all that was left was hate. He grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her to her feet. Without a word, they walked out the front door, leaving a vacuum in the air behind them. Mr. Thompson quietly closed the door and turned to me. "Are you all right, Mrs. Miller?" he asked. I looked around the room at the furniture, the photos, the memories. It no longer felt heavy. It just felt empty. "Yes, Arthur," I said. "I believe I am." The fallout was swift and brutal, though I only heard about it secondhand, mostly from Margaret, who heard it through the town's relentless gossip mill. The sale of the house went through in less than a month. I got a price that was even better than we had hoped. The first thing I did was pay off the home equity line of credit in full. The feeling of erasing that debt, of freeing my home's title from the burden he had placed on it, was indescribable. It was a clean, pure relief. For David and Sarah, the consequences were catastrophic. Without my financial backing, their carefully constructed lifestyle collapsed like a house of cards. They couldn't afford the mortgage on their own home, not with their spending habits. They certainly couldn't afford the private school, the country club, the new cars. The loss of the family home and the inheritance David had been counting on was not just a financial blow, but a social one. Their status, which they had cultivated so carefully, evaporated overnight. The stress shattered their already fragile partnership. According to Margaret, the arguments were legendary. Sarah blamed David for his arrogance, for pushing me too far, for getting caught. David blamed Sarah for her greed, for her expensive tastes, for the idea of changing the will in the first place. They turned on each other with the same viciousness they had once directed, more subtly, at me. Their marriage, built on a foundation of mutual self-interest in my money, could not survive the loss of its primary funding source. 6 months after I sold my house, Sarah left him. She took Lily and moved in with her sister in another state. The last I heard, David was forced to sell their house at a loss to cover his debts. He was living in a small, rented apartment, driving a 10-year-old car, and struggling to keep his business afloat without my periodic capital injections. He was ruined, financially, socially, and personally. He had lost his wife, his daughter was hundreds of miles away, and he had lost the mother he had treated like a possession. I did not feel joy at this news. I did not feel a thrill of vengeful satisfaction. I felt a profound and somber sense of distance. It was as if I were reading a story about people I used to know a long time ago. Their downfall was not my victory. It was the natural and inevitable outcome of their own actions. It was gravity. What goes up must come down. What is built on lies will eventually collapse. I had not pushed them off a cliff. I had simply stepped out of the way and stopped holding them up. My new life began. I moved into my apartment, a bright, sunny 2-bedroom place with a balcony that overlooked a beautifully maintained community garden. It was a fraction of the size of my old house, and I felt lighter the moment I walked in. I brought with me only the things that mattered: Robert's oak table, my favorite armchair, my books, and the photos of Lily and a younger, happier David. The rest I sold or gave away. It was a cleansing. The silence in my new home was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the old house. It was a quiet, peaceful silence, filled with my own thoughts and my own choices. I started a small container garden on my balcony. I rejoined my book club. I had coffee with Margaret every Tuesday morning. I took a pottery class. I started slowly to rebuild a life that was entirely my own, for the first time since I was a young bride. Lily was the one remaining, untangled thread. The trust I had set up was working perfectly. Her school fees were paid directly from it. The trustee sent me quarterly reports. Sarah tried once to have David's name added as a signatory. The bank, following my explicit instructions, refused. Through Mr. Thompson, I made it clear that if they challenged the trust, I would countersue for the full amount of the misappropriated funds, and I would win. They backed down. I made sure Lily had my new phone number and address. For a few months, I heard nothing, and my heart ached. I feared they had poisoned her against me. Then, one Saturday, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered, and a small voice said, "Grandma." It was Lily. She was calling from her mother's phone, she said, when her mom was in the shower. She missed me. She wanted to know if I was okay. That phone call was like the first rain after a long drought. We started talking regularly, first in secret, then, as Sarah's anger cooled into weary resignation, more openly. When Lily was 12, she asked if she could come visit me for a week in the summer. I said yes immediately. I paid for her plane ticket. Her visit was a balm to my soul. She was still the same sweet, intelligent, creative girl. She was old enough now to understand, in a general sense, that there had been a big fight about money between her parents and me, but she held no grudges. She just wanted her grandmother. We baked cookies at Robert's table. We worked in the garden. I took her to the library and the local museum. We talked for hours. It was a relationship based on pure, uncomplicated love, with no transactions, no obligations, no leverage. It was real. One afternoon, we were sitting on my balcony drinking lemonade. She looked at me, her young face serious. "Mom says you're happy now," she said. It was a question more than a statement. I looked out at the flowers, at the blue sky. I thought about the long, painful journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the cold clarity, the difficult choices. "Yes, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I am. I'm very happy." It's been 5 years now since I sold the house. My life is quiet, but it is not empty. It is full of my own purpose. I have my friends, my hobbies, my peace of mind. And I have Lily, who visits every summer and calls me every Sunday. She is the continuation of my true legacy, the legacy of love, not of money. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I think about David. I do not hate him. Hate is a fire that consumes the person who holds it, and I have no energy to burn. I feel a deep, abiding sorrow for the man he became, and for the son I lost long before I ever knew he was gone. He chose a path of greed and disrespect, and he is now living in the country he built for himself. I chose a different path. I chose myself. It's a strange thing to discover so late in life that the person you need to be most loyal to is yourself. For decades, I believed my value was in what I could do for others, for my family. My identity was wife, mother, grandmother. When they stripped that away, I felt like nothing. But in that nothingness, I found a new foundation to build upon. I found Eleanor, just Eleanor, and she is enough. It is never too late to reclaim your life, to demand respect, to choose your own peace. You don't have to set the world on fire in revenge. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply walk away, close the door on what was, and quietly, deliberately build something new. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the first stone.